Hello, here we go again. This is On the Mic with Mike. I am Mike Jarvis. My guest this time around is no stranger at all to us. Well, hardly any one of my guests would be. Mr. Colin Riley, former legislator in Montserrat, former government minister, teacher of high repute, long-standing teacher, now resides in the United States, involved in real estate. Colin, wonderful to have you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. I've listened to a few of your guests. I think you do a great job, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I'm sure that that trend will continue with you. Well, here we are. We are having a general election coming up in Montserrat, the 24th of October. The line of discussion that I've been having is that not just a matter of the election per se, but looking at where Montserrat is at the moment, going forward since we've had the eruption of the volcano. And to what extent is this a pivot point, a point for us now to take a very serious look at ourselves and at the country and say, well, where do we go from here and how do we get there? What's your take on this whole thing to begin with?
Well, I believe that we have exhausted ordinariness and that there's only one direction from here, and that is to plan our way forward and upward. We need to think about expanding the economy and raising the wealth profile of Montserrat and Montserratians so that more people can stay on the island. And that is going to require a very deliberate effort. I have a few ideas of my own that I would like to contribute eventually in this conversation. But I believe that we have been going around in circles, talking a lot about the same things. They're taking a little bit too long to be implemented. And it is time for us to be very firm and clear as to where we want to go. The ideas, I believe, are the best in the Caribbean. Montserrat has been overplanned and under-implemented. And by that, I mean some of the best documents that I've ever read in terms of preparing a place for the future were written about Montserrat. The British government and other international organizations that support us financially have paid for some excellent studies. What I haven't been able to understand is how is it that we have this implementation backlog with all of these projects that are so artfully written about, carefully considered, thoughtfully planned out, and are sitting there on shelves gathering dust while our people are moving on year after year, getting older and getting more disconnected from our place called home. I am saying it is time for us, even if we don't live there permanently, to return to Montserrat with the expectation that we can make a go of it, that we can have success, and that we can produce the kinds of outcomes which I know some of the other islands nearby have been accomplishing.
You know, Colin, so far during this series, I have come across so many hard-hitting, very well thought out statements and approaches, concepts, and concerns regarding Montserrat. And here you are now just dropping a few more that we really need to pay serious attention to. For example, we have exhausted ordinariness, or we have an
Yeah,
excess of ordinariness. Montserrat is overstudied, overplanned, and under-implemented. That implementation deficit, all of these great ideas, and we've had some fantastic ideas coming out of Montserrat, in addition to the very expensive multitude of reports that we have had that are very, very firmly based in their academic underpinning. But we're still having the same conversations over and over again. Does it take a Colin Riley type person then to push the, as I say, push the boat out and start the implementation process?
well, I think a lot of people are well prepared to do it, but we need the tools. I came to Boston in 1998 as a graduate student, and I have studied the city of Boston in great detail. And the only way to make a place new is if you have firm, decisive leadership with clear implementation strategies and a business community that is responsive. Now, we have a lot of economic theory that has been written about small countries. And I wanted to talk about one that I'm drawn to, which is in 1985 or thereabouts. I went to the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, and one of my contemporaries was a guy named Dr. Noel Gray, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago now, but who I always remember for his thoughtfulness and his ideas.
And of course, that's Dr. Noel Gray of Montserrat, the late.
Yes. I went to UWI. I was an undergraduate student. Noel was a graduate student. But we met often with some of the Montserrat students. I remember people like Lenford KB and a few others who used to be around, Alfred Ryan and Esther Isaac Lynch, who were always in on the conversations. And we were excited about Montserrat. And Noel was part of a group of students who joined what was then called the Consortium Graduate School in the Department of Economics. And lo and behold, Noel always spoke about one person, Professor Don Harris. Now you may recognize the name because that is the presidential candidate's father.
Yes.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris's father.
Yes. So you're talking about elite economic thinking. And Noel Gray was interested in one thing, the development of Montserrat. And he came up with what I thought was a very brilliant phrase. It says, a little goes a long way. I myself have some exposure to economic development thinking. So I always had it in my mind that if we were to think through the next steps for our country, we'll be talking about sequential project implementation with a pretty substantial budget that can share things around in the economy and help the country to grow. So you look at what I call the small island economic development model, and the whole concept of developing a small place has now become, I believe, a central sort of organizational practice where you say, this is what makes a place work, and this is what we are doing. And every single time I look at successful places, I travel a lot in my ministerial appointment years, 2009 to 14. And every time I went to a place that was doing exceptionally well, nobody knew who the leader was. There's very little conversation about politics. And people were more interested in the economy. What is it that we do here that makes us unique, connects us to the global system, and gives us an opportunity to create wealthy citizens? And every time I went to a country, and I won't name the one that I have at the top of my list, where I believe they were not accomplishing their biggest and best outcomes. You knew who the leader was, you knew who the opposition leader was. There was always, every conversation started with the politics. And at the end of the day, you're looking around the place and you're saying, but what if they were to develop this place properly? Because I just came from that place, which looks far more advanced than this place. So I'm wondering if the Barbados model makes sense, where we have a tripartite agreement between the political sector, the business sector, and civil society to insist on certain things. And we can't leave out anybody out of this insistence, you know. Because you see, the 1st of January every year, we should go to the governor and ask the governor, what have you contributed to Montserrat's advancement over the last 12 months? And that should be a standard question. We should go to all the political leaders and ask them the same thing. What is it that you contributed over the last 12 months? Give us a report on your time. And these are the things I think which would insist that those who are offering themselves for political office and those who are charged to lead our economy and lead our civil society and so forth are being held to account.
Can I
And
just
I don't think Montserrat has done a good job of that.
Right, because that is what I wanted to come to. Because is it a situation that the emphasis, the example that you gave there of one country doing well, where the focus wasn't too much on the politics and you well hardly knew who the leader was, and in another example, the country is not doing as well as it should, but there's a preoccupation in politics. So where in those two spheres do you see Montserrat fitting at the moment? And then how do we, well, yeah, if it's in the latter, get it out of that?
Every time I think about Montserrat, I am drawn to two phrases. One was made to me by a mathematics professor at the University of Tennessee. And what he basically said is that when a group of people are confronted by forces that they consider larger than themselves, they turn on each other. The other phrase is something I heard on, the queen of radio, Rose Willock. She had a Saturday morning show, and one of her guests said, sometimes water is more than musha. And those two things stick in my head. Like, where are we in terms of being supportive of each other? Sometimes I think about the school system and how we are educated and the whole push to be first in class. But there's no education around teamwork. And one time I was advising a student online who was living in England. And basically I had to ask her, if you are in a class with all these students, how many of your colleagues are you leaning on for ideas? And the answer was, I don't. It's me, one, and God. So I don't know how much of this makes sense for Montserrat, but sometimes I see this inertia, this lack of teamwork and team building, and a lot of other things that I think have value in them that we'd be not so good at doing a good job with. And we're going to have to ask ourselves some very hard questions. We were given an opportunity to make a country virtually from scratch. That's what the volcano did to us. Gave us an opportunity to build a country from scratch. And we need to look around and see what have we done well, what have we haven't done so well, and how are we going to fix it.
Well, in terms of building the country again virtually from scratch, from what you'd spoke about before with all of the reports and all of the great ideas and all of the strategies that are sitting around, well, can we say that there is a template there? So we need to build then on that template. But then how to build on that template? Is it now requiring a new type of political thinking? A more
I think we need to
nationalistic, coalition-oriented, I mean, across the board, national unity construct type of political thinking?
Well, the first thing I think we all need to agree is that all the political parties need to make a pledge that they're going to build a new airport. Because what John JAO has done for us is to take us out of regional air travel and has forced us to always be special purchasing transportation service to our next door neighbor. Because the aircraft type that is common in the Caribbean cannot land in Montserrat. And if we want to do transportation planning, we have got to get an airport that reduces our overhead costs. And by that, I mean overhead costs for the operating of an airline or air service. Because if the planes that the the several companies have cannot land in your country, they're just going to fly by you. And you're always going to be subsidizing that route. So I believe it's time for all the political parties to make a pledge. We are going to build a new airport and we are going to insist on it.
Okay, so what we have at the moment are all of the political parties, and I'm convinced all of the politicians have been talking about access and particularly the inadequacy of our airport access. You, should I interpret it, want them to go a step further and demand a new or better airport jointly?
I don't know if I would say demand. I think they need to organize a new airport because I've thought about it and I have a very specific idea. I think the airport should be built by the private sector.
Which private sector? The Montserrat private sector to make that investment, or the international private sector as investors coming in?
I believe the Montserrat private sector should build it. Because if you take a difficult project and put it in the international system, you're paying about, I believe, between a 75 and 150% premium. And we have the capability in Montserrat or among Montserratians to build our own airport.
How does that set?
We need to think like that.
Right.
There are enough engineers. There are enough people who have understanding of airport design, and even to go as far as to talk about the surfacing of the runway. Because as I understand it, there are 2 Montserratians who were given the contract to do the mix design for the asphalt that paved the BVI airport. We need to start to coalesce our knowledge and skill level and our collective accomplishment and start promoting our own people again.
And by that, you're talking about not only the Montserratians at home, but the wider global Montserrat community, where even particularly in the case of aviation, where I had no idea, but I'm now finding out the wealth of expertise in that sector that really is quote unquote owned by Montserrat.
Yeah, well, we spend a lot of time. I talk about Montserrat having a cost culture.
Yes, I've heard you say that, yeah.
we have promoted people, especially on social media, who begin with a negative bent and who have a lot of negative things to say. And a lot of times they go unchallenged and people seem to buy into the negative narrative because it's giving them an opportunity to vent, which is fine. But where do we have a collective conversation about things like airport design, who knows what, coalescing our ideas? Like, for example, we have enough electrical engineers in our system to design the lighting for the airport. One time I said to a guy, I believe we could build an airport right there. And I pointed to a hill that needed to be taken down. This is one of my former students. He was standing in lookout. I said, there's an airport that could come off of that bluff. I eventually did a sketch of it and put it on Facebook, and nobody responded, but it's okay. I'm not an airport designer, so I don't expect people to take me seriously. But I have a feeling that we could build a 7,000-foot runway by putting half the runway in the water. And most of the airports in the world, the runways are sitting in former bays or even shoreline and coastlines.
Well, I've seen similar sketches by other Montserratians, and I'm sure that Captain Tony Meade wouldn't mind me referencing him in this particular respect. Having an airstrip and part of it, leading out into the water. So just to focus on this, because all of this is related to your broad theme of economic development, and Montserrat, the template is there to build Montserrat from scratch, but it requires a bit of big thinking, big world thinking. We see
Well,
massive infrastructure.
why don't we
Okay, sorry,
fundraise?
you continue.
Why don't we begin fundraising for the airport with the expectation that it's going to be a combination of equity and debt, and that in 10 years' time the government would buy the airport from the private entity that develops it.
Okay, that is a thought. How would that then gel, or how would you introduce the fact that Montserrat is a heavily aided, and I've used the term aid addict, heavily dependent on British aid. So then the British funders of Montserrat will have to be brought into that conversation. So what is your perspective on that?
I believe that is the January 2nd conversation.
Ah, yes, that you'd mentioned before.
Every
Yeah.
year we go to them and say, look, what you did last year, what are your accomplishments for the last 12 months? These are our ideas, and this is what you have delivered. What is it that you did over the last 12 months?
Does the Colin,
listen,
this is
one of the
fantastic.
things I said to you,
Yeah, go on.
the people who come to Montserrat, who you challenge about your British citizenship, switch their conversation mid-sentence. I've seen it happen in my office when I was Minister for Health and when I was Minister for Education. When you challenge them on your British citizenship, they change their conversation mid-sentence. Seen it happen all the time.
Right, you jumped ahead of me there because I was just about to suggest to you that where you're suggesting that we should switch the conversation and we should go to the British officials and say to them, well, what have you done for us or towards the development or recovery of Montserrat in the past year? I could put it to you that I get the impression that that question is flipped, is that they seem to be more asking Montserrat, basically, what have you done with what we have given you over the past year? And based on how well or not you answer the question will depend on how much more you get, if any.
Yeah, well, I think we need to end the aid conversation within the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that we should be standing on our own feet. And that we need to say that if you give us an airport, there's a guy who works at the port, I think his name is Rogolus, who used to say, give us an airport and a seaport and leave us alone. That's a statement that came from a guy who walks the street, doesn't even drive, and he has that thinking, and he said it. Give us an airport and a seaport and leave us alone. Now, we have another statement that I heard from my Toyota mechanic, guy who worked at Bruce Ferrara's sales and service place. And one day we were having a chat about the port and the town center and all the planning. And the guy just said to me, Mr. Riley, you guys are going about the port construction the wrong way. Now, I like to listen to people who don't speak often because usually you hear something brand new. Not a guy who speaks a lot, but he said, I said, so what do you mean by that? He said, well, if I were doing it, I would dredge Piper's Pond all the way back to the market. And we can get an inlet there that allows boats to come in and dock. And we won't need to build any breakwater.
I've heard something like that myself.
I said to the guy, like this. So why is it that when we have public meetings to discuss these things that you don't come? You know what he said to me? Because Ali would never listen to me. So we're not short on ideas, We have some very smart, bright, accomplished people. And I am trying to figure out how to put them to work. There's a guy who heads the credit union called Peter Quealy, economic genius.
Formerly. Well, no, he's an economic genius, but formerly head of the credit union, I meant, yeah.
Oh, he's formerly. I didn't know he left. But anyway, Peter is my former student, so I will take some credit for triggering some of his thinking because I was his geography teacher. And I think Peter and a few others started to take economics seriously based on some of the things I used to talk about in class. But anyway, so Peter talked about credit guarantees. And I have a feeling that we talk about the airport and the fact that the private sector should build it. The private sector does not have the financial capacity to build an airport right now. But my question is, do they have the capacity to raise the money? If somebody knows that in 10 years' time, there is going to be an agreement to sell the airport to the public sector, would they invest now, given that the credit guarantee is coming from London? That's the question I ask. And if we build towards that kind of thinking, maybe somebody would come into the cycle of conversation and want to help us even more. Now, I had a little bit of a weekend conversation with a DFID official. And I said to the gentleman, you guys have no idea how to plan a transportation system. So you've been trying to plan Montserrat transportation for the last, at the time it was 15 years. And right now, if I want to go to Antigua, I would be better off walking. You have spent $160 million on transportation planning, and there's nothing to show for it. The gentleman went totally cold. And the next week, he came to talk to me, and he said to me, you are wrong. I say, how am I wrong? It's not 160 million, it's 148 million. So
missed the point completely.
I think that sometimes the January the 2nd conversation could have some merit. You know, like in the US, they have the State of the Union.
Yeah.
We need something like that. We need to ask some hard questions. What is it that was done last year as we move towards our goal of building an airport? Now, second of all, I also believe Montserrat needs 5 $50 million projects.
Would these be state government capital projects? Are you talking about private sector led projects?
Private sector. W. Arthur Lewis, who is was the head of economics department at Princeton University. He's from St. Lucia.
Yeah, I think got a Nobel laureate.
He got a Nobel Prize for Development Economics. And W. Arthur Lewis said that the private sector we're looking for is not the local people. It's not the local people. He called it dual economy model. And then he said, look, if you really want to develop these countries, you have to look for capital investors from elsewhere. A lot of the deals in the world are done on the Gulf Coast. So we need to ask ourselves, who is our Gulf Coast representative where we are talking to the UK? Not the people who go in the meeting where the answers are already given. I'm talking about people who can make a phone call and change the way the world functions. Montserrat needs to work on that kind of what you would call networking.
But that metaphorical okay, there's a real golf course example, certainly. But then let's look at a metaphorical golf course situation. You would need to have an organization, a unit, an agency that interfaces with the local and external investment community to do that sort of networking on behalf of Montserrat. And my mind is going back to an MDC type of organization. But we do not have that at the moment. We had it, but we no longer have it. So would that be one of the priority things that you would like to see put in place to trigger and move that type of conversation?
I don't like state-sponsored public entities like the MDC. I believe that they have a limited lifespan because there's no private incentive involved. If you don't have private incentive and people are promised to make a lot of money, nothing is going to happen. People must make profit. It's equal to their time, compensation for their time and risk. And we need to think about how the Montserratians see wealth. I summarize it as 3 outcomes. Wealth is theft, wealth is is not what do you call a justifiable inheritance, or wealth comes from the underworld. We cannot continue those summaries of wealth. Wealth comes from smart work and hard work and investing in the right economic activities. That's where wealth comes from. And that is why Dominica, there's a guy in Dominica, who used to play football in Sturge Park, who just built a Curio hotel by
Yes, I heard
Hilltop.
about that. I heard about that. I think it was also in
You know what that guy said? Ian Edwards was married to one of the students of the secondary school when I was a teacher. They used to call him Sugar George. Now, I watched him score goals for Montserrat in St. Kitts in 1989. He was a very skillful forward. That guy taught himself architecture, as I understand it, and has won an international competition for architecture based, I think, out of France. Now that's him building up his profile and heading in the direction of becoming a highly regarded technical professional in a field in which he was not formally trained. But he had this passion, and the guy said something that stuck in my head. I got my idea about villas in Montserrat when I was a laborer. A construction laborer has gone full circle and is now a hotel developer. Built a 75-room hotel. I think he had a lot to do with the design of the property. Now, when we talk about the dividends of Montserrat, we have to count all of those things. That we have been able to inspire people from other countries. I went to a dinner with 4 people. One of them is a lawyer from St. Lucia who was working in the Attorney General's office. I don't remember her name, but there were 4 of us, 2 attorneys, and there's a businessman there, and I shot myself as a city planner, geographer, planner. And the lady said something which I will never forget. This island appears to me as if it was set up to be very sophisticated. Now, this is with all of the volcano tear down what we consider the core of our civilization,
Mm-hmm.
And people are still seeing that Montserrat has a history of not only good accomplishment, significant accomplishment. And if we're not excited about the place, then how are we going to build it back? We have to want to do things that are unusual, because small size is already a problem. Small geography is already considered to be a limitation. But I don't see them having that problem in Bermuda, and it's half the size of Montserrat. They have mastered the sea, have mastered their narrative. And those are some of the things that we need to think about.
I know recently in one of the conversations I had, now that you're referencing Bermuda, regarding the airport example that you gave a while ago, I referenced Sabre. And not only for the fact that Sabre's airport is smaller and more precarious than the Montserrat airport, Sabre itself is smaller and Sabre's population is smaller, but yet Sabre, which is in almost the same overseas territory relationship with the Dutch as Montserrat is with the British, Sabre economically, you can say, is thriving. So size really in that context should not be a limitation. It's to have that internal drive and the internal drivers. On your point of the private sector, are you then looking at a Montserrat private sector beyond the borders of Montserrat, a Montserrat private sector that embraces the diaspora? And we have some influential people of Montserratians globally in business, in government, in every profession that you can think about. So are we looking then at harnessing their resources? Because the private sector in Montserrat is quite small. numerically, particularly now, post-volcano. I do not know about private sector's capitalization, but it's something to look at. So you're looking at a broader picture, the Montserrat private sector being the resident Montserrat private sector and the diaspora or the overseas Montserrat private sector to drive that forward.
If you build an airport that has 50,000 passenger movement a year, you could virtually pay for it. And any economy where the tourism arrival count is 10 times the population size is a wealthy place. If you have 6,000 people and you get 60,000 visitors a year, you have a wealthy country. These are some of the summary statistics that I've been looking at. If you want a wealthy place, multiply your numbers and connect to the international system. And tourism is a connection. One of the things I've done is to look at the economic history of Montserrat using sugar plantations. And I would tell you, almost every village or settlement area in Montserrat has 3 windmills. Almost every village, you go around the village and do the historical analysis of the village or community, and you're going to find a minimum of 3 sugar mills.
Indicators of economic activity back in the day.
Yes. So what is our critical property type when it comes to the tourism sector and the 60,000 visitors that we need to have a thriving economy? It is the small boutique hotel and it is the high-end villa. I call it the mansions of Montserrat. This is what we must commit to build. We don't lack for talent, you know. We built a cultural center using Montserrat engineering, architecture, engineering, and construction in the cultural center. And when the hospital project was funded at $29 million construction, somebody challenged me, oh, what are you going to build with that? I said, we're going to build 4 times the cultural center. Because the cultural center is 7 million. And we have a budget 4 times that for construction. And the person looked at me and said, no, I get your point. Now, we're still talking about constructing a hospital 12 years on. But that's beside the point. The point I am making is, if you want a wealthy country, you plan the economy first. And you cannot run a modern economy without a proper airport.
So the Sabre example and even the St. Bart's example, and St. Bart's is at the complete other end of the scale.
Montserrat must have aspirations a little above that. Montserrat needs to have aspirations a little above that. Because we tried the Sabre airport, you know. The problem is, okay, here's another summary from me. Any country that has a mother country as attached to it will do reasonably well. The worst you can do is going to be good enough. And sometimes I wonder if Montserrat thinks that, you know, the 120 or 130 million a year in budgetary support is good enough. We're not rebuilding our population with that money. And we haven't created any great business thrust. Who are the MS Osborns of today's generation?
Good question.
MS Osborn started in Harris's. My father told me that Michael S. Osborn, his store was first in Harris's. And then he bought a building in Plymouth and moved his business to Plymouth. And he has done, that company has done some great work, including building the Viewpoint Hotel. So who is the MS Osborn of today's generation? Can't be me. I'm 60.
But Colin,
yes, sir.
You, a while ago, a few minutes back, towards at the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about the pool of talent and ideas and expertise. And even before we started the recording, the large pool of highly qualified people we have in Montserrat who have been university level trained, etc., etc.
Okay, let me put my statement a different way.
Okay.
I would like to see some 20-something-year-old people be given the opportunity to become millionaires. And I spoke about this already, 3 to 5 a year. At the end or during the time when you're working on your project, your bank account is gonna have 7 figures in it after about 2 years of engagement. You have to have private incentive to get people interested, and the talent is there. We have not mapped out an economy of consistency, and our access is a problem. We need to fix those things, and our people will thrive. We need to liberalize the banking system a little bit, give more access to credit, restore the Tourism Challenge Fund or some other type of business grant program that has given us some really successful business stories, and watch the economy grow from there, where we mark it out as a specific entity with 4 core areas.
How do we move this concept forward? Because you have my full attention on this. But going back to the point where you spoke about our implementation deficit, as I put it. So how do we get Colin Riley or a Colin Riley type person to pull all of this thing together to make it happen?
Hire me.
If I could, I would.
If you hire me right now, the first task that I would want to work on is putting together the capital structure for a new airport. Because I believe in 2 years, if we have the right funding, we're done. Planes are landing on a 7,000-foot runway.
I'm tempted to ask, where would you put it?
In Northwest Bluff. Half of the runway, 3,500 feet, is on land, which is flattening the land using all the excavator machines and giving people work. And the other half is in the water, where we design a breakwater system using our own engineering talent and put another 3,500 to 4,000 feet of runway in the water. And the area around that whole airport development would become tourism property development potential. 4 big parcels and a medical school. Those are the projects I'm talking about. $50 million a pop.
Is there any concern that the longer it takes, and I know, the time is going, but this is such a fascinating discussion. Is there any concern that the longer it takes, the further we are removed from that sort of reality? Well, at least in our lifetime.
Montserrat is not going anywhere. The island has been there for about 15 million years. People have been living on it for probably about 2,000 years. The island is not going anywhere. The basic geography shifted a little bit with the volcano, blew up and pushed the coastline out in one area by 2,000 meters. There is more land space. It's going to come back. Vegetation is going to be restored. Volcanoes erupt all the time. And we need to start thinking about restoring our connection to the lands in the south. And I would begin by restoring Sturge Park.
Sorry, what do you have in mind for that? Because that is in the so-called unsafe zone. So there's a
well, I don't think people
factor there is very high, isn't it?
I don't think people are going to go there for sporting events, but you're going to go there and restore the park to make it look green and pretty, and so that people can, if there is a day when you can go in to walk around, have a park where people can connect to the gift from the Quakers, the Sturge family.
Right.
These are some of the things that I think we need to start to think about. You're not going there. Daytime occupancy, you go take a walk, hike, picnic, do whatever you need. But this is a piece of land that signifies charity. It signifies a connection between Montserrat's former residents and what they gave to our people as a gift. Because as I understand it, half of the park was given to the secondary school.
You
So
just triggered something in me, Colin. Something I saw in Holland. There's a place called Madura Dam, and what it is, and there's one in Britain as well. It is a mini version of Amsterdam and a mini version of some parts of Holland. Now, if this is just off the top of my head, and this is what this type of conversation does, we've been talking a lot about our buried city and our Caribbean Pompeii and whatever. No place else that I know of in the Caribbean, and I think other than one part in Mexico, in the Western Hemisphere, where you have the remnant, we're leaving out Italy and so forth, where you have the remnants of a former capital that to some degree is still accessible. Would your concept, your idea for Sturge Park that we're just fleshing out here, possibly encompass a sort of a reconstructed mini replica of what Plymouth used to be as a tourist attraction?
that's a wonderful idea. I never thought about it myself. So I would give you credit for the thinking.
Well, give
But
yourself credit for inspiring it.
well, thank you. But I absolutely believe that we are not to give up on the lands of the South. And you're not going to restore them to what they were. And I know Peter White, the former MSS principal, because we have a few Peter Whites around. The Peter White spoke about inverting the island and putting the recreational lands in the south, which is where we have given up the settlement. So at least for the next 2 decades, we should be thinking about the lands of the south as recreational lands, parkland, as land that we go for wilding and doing the sorts of things that people do in areas that are not settled. We have to be careful with the wild pigs and so forth, because they might want to bite some of us. But
Yeah. Well,
that we
Colin,
could take care.
yeah, I must say that this has been an engrossing conversation. I really appreciate the time. We'll have to continue. We'll have to continue this. But I just want to end on one thought from you. If I'm to summarize what we've discussed and what I've heard coming from you, is the message is shift away. Yes, we have an election coming up and it's part of the democratic process, but shift away from the, let me call it the internecine politics, and focus more on development and ideas that would drive development and reconstruction, and my new favorite word, resetting Montserrat.
I think that's the summary that I would totally buy into. And I absolutely believe that we can do a great job of putting these things together. We need 250 million for $550 million projects. And we need a focus from the private sector and encouraged private sector on building a new airport. We need to think about how we are going to reset the wealth profile and the wealth conditioning of Montserrat and its people.
Mr. Colin Riley, thank you very much for taking the time. We need to have further conversations. And the next time we talk, I would also want us to talk a bit about your involvement with sports and cultural development and festivals, that you have been such a key part in putting what I call the March Heritage Festival, pardon me, and
Yes.
the Christmas Festival. That we need to talk about those. Thank you very much, Colin. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. One last parting word, and that is we need to write another hot.
You know, we have a few, but we just haven't been promoting them. Oh, they're there. They are there.
I have a feeling that we have not modeled the great Alphonsus Castle and the leadership genius that he brought to his work. And that is part of our problem.
I am not going to let you continue on that, because that is a point for our next discussion. I am certain, as we say, hold that thought. Thank you very much,
Feeling
Colin.
hot.
Well, you've been hot. I'm telling you that. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.
All right, man.